A CEO mocked a veteran single dad's resume, but when his Navy SEAL past comes crashing into her world, her power, her pride, and even her life hang on one haunting question: will forgiveness be enough to save them both? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. John Carter sat at his worn kitchen table, staring at the laptop screen with furrowed brows. The resume before him felt inadequate, like trying to squeeze an ocean into a glass. 20 years of military service, countless missions, lives saved, and leadership tested in the harshest conditions imaginable. Yet here he was, struggling to translate it all into corporate buzzwords. He rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar tension headache building. The morning sun filtered through the small kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the scattered papers and coffee cups that littered the table. "Dad, you're doing that thing again," Emily said, sliding into the chair next to him. At 15, she had an uncanny ability to read his moods. You know, where you overthink everything until your forehead gets all scrunchy. John couldn't help but smile. "Is that your professional medical opinion, Dr. Carter?" "Absolutely." Emily picked up one of the draft resumes, her eyes scanning the page. "I don't understand why you have to change who you are just to fit their fancy business talk. Because eliminated hostile threats doesn't exactly translate to managed workplace dynamics." John sighed, taking a sip of his now cold coffee. The bitter taste matched his mood. Emily put down the paper and fixed him with a serious look, the same determined expression her mother used to have. The thought brought a familiar ache to his chest. "Dad, you led elite teams through impossible situations. You saved lives. You taught people to be brave when everything was scary." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "That means more than knowing how to make PowerPoint presentations." John squeezed back, amazed at how his daughter had grown into such a wise young woman. "When did you get so smart?" "Must be those good genes," she grinned. "Now let me help. We can make this work without turning you into something you're not." For the next hour, they worked together, Emily helping him find ways to describe his military experience in terms that might resonate with civilian employers. She had a natural gift for words, something she'd inherited from her mother. "Look here," Emily pointed to a section about his team leadership. "Instead of just listing the missions, why don't we focus on how you brought out the best in people? That's what these companies want. Someone who can inspire others." John nodded slowly, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with coffee. "You know, your mom would be so proud of you right now." Emily's eyes glistened slightly, but her smile remained bright. "She'd be proud of you too, Dad. You're not giving up, even when it's hard." They worked through the morning, refining and polishing. John couldn't help but notice how Emily kept sneaking glances at him, her concern barely hidden behind her encouraging words. "I'll be fine, sweetheart," he assured her, recognizing her worry. "It's just an interview." "I know," Emily said, though her voice wavered slightly. "It's just, you deserve this, Dad. After everything you've done for our country, for other people, for me. You deserve a chance to show them who you really are." John stood up and pulled his daughter into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Having you believe in me is worth more than any job." Emily hugged him back fiercely. "Promise me you won't let them make you feel small. You're a hero, Dad. My hero." The next morning, John stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. The charcoal suit felt foreign after years of uniforms, but Emily had insisted it brought out his eyes. The silver at his temples caught the light, earned through years of service and sacrifice. "Looking sharp, Dad," Emily called from the doorway, already dressed for school. She walked over and straightened his tie, though it didn't need it. "Remember what we practiced? You've got this." John took a deep breath, centering himself the way he used to before missions. "I've got this," he repeated, more for her benefit than his own. The drive to downtown was quiet, each mile bringing him closer to Hale Enterprises headquarters. The massive glass skyscraper rose before him, reflecting the morning sun like a beacon, or a warning. As he parked in the visitor's lot, his phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Remember, you're Captain John Carter, Navy SEAL. You've faced worse than stuck-up executives. Love you, Dad, DDO." A smile tugged at his lips as he read the message. She was right, of course. He'd led men through firefights, made split-second decisions with lives hanging in the balance. and carried wounded comrades through hostile territory. He could handle an interview. Standing before the imposing building, John straightened his tie one final time. The revolving doors spun endlessly, people streaming in and out like a choreographed dance. He thought of Emily's faith in him, of all the men and women he'd served with, of the wife he'd lost but whose strength he still carried. Taking a deep breath, John Carter walked toward the revolving doors. In his mind, he heard Emily's voice. "You're a hero, Dad. My hero." With that thought warming his heart, he stepped forward into whatever challenges awaited him inside. The 64th floor executive suite of Hale Enterprises felt like another world. John Carter sat perfectly straight in a leather chair worth more than his monthly rent, his shoulders squared and hands resting calmly on his knees, the same posture that had carried him through countless mission briefings. But this was different. Instead of tactical maps and intelligence reports, a mahogany desk the size of a small boat separated him from Victoria Hale, whose manicured fingers now lifted his resume with 2 fingers, as if it might soil her designer suit. "So, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice carrying the crisp edge of expensive education, "tell me why Hale Enterprises should entrust its global security operations to someone whose most recent leadership experience involves." She paused, eyebrows arching. Leading military operations. John maintained his composure, though he felt the familiar tightening in his jaw. 22 years of military service provided me with extensive experience in risk assessment, crisis management, and team leadership, Miss Hale. Victoria's laugh was soft but cutting. "Mr. Carter, this isn't the battlefield. We're talking about a Fortune 500 company with billions in assets and thousands of employees worldwide." She set his resume down and folded her hands. "Our security director needs to understand corporate culture, international business protocols, stakeholder management." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp shadows across the modern art pieces that adorned her walls. John noticed how she kept glancing at the elegant watch on her wrist, already dismissing him. "With all due respect," John said quietly, "leadership principles remain constant, whether you're protecting lives or assets." "Charming philosophy," Victoria replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "But this isn't about philosophy. This is business." She stood, walking to her window with the confident stride of someone used to ending conversations on her terms. "Your service to our country is admirable, Mr. Carter, but the corporate world requires a different skill set. We need someone who understands the complexities of global commerce, not." She waved a hand, dismissively. "Combat tactics." John felt a familiar calm settle over him, the same stillness that preceded critical moments in the field. "Miss Hale, my resume doesn't list boardrooms or profit margins, but it does include something relevant to this conversation." She turned, annoyed at his persistence. "And what might that be?" "Operation Nightshade, Bangladesh, 2018. The change in Victoria's expression was subtle but immediate. The polished veneer cracked, color draining from her face as she gripped the edge of her desk. "That's classified information," she whispered. "Yes, at Island." John's voice remained steady, his eyes locked with hers. "Just like the extraction of a prominent American CEO from a terrorist cell in Chittagong. A mission that required months of planning, perfect execution, and absolute discretion." Victoria sank slowly back into her chair. Gone was the imperious CEO, replaced by someone who looked much smaller, much more human. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a glass of water. "You," she swallowed hard. "You were there?" "I led the team that brought you home, Miss Hale." John's voice softened, recognizing the shadow of old fear crossing her face. "We tracked your location through 3 countries. Monitored your captors for 6 weeks. When the moment came, we moved in during the darkest hour of a moonless night." Victoria's perfectly maintained composure continued to crumble as long-buried memories surfaced. "I never saw your faces," she whispered. "They kept me blindfolded during the rescue. I only remember voices, someone carrying me, the sound of helicopters." "That was protocol," John explained gently. "Your safety was our only priority. The less you knew, the better, for everyone involved." The silence that filled the office was heavy with unspoken things. Outside, the city hummed 64 stories below. But in here, time seemed suspended between what was and what island. Victoria stared at John as if seeing him for the first time. Gone was her dismissive smirk, replaced by an expression caught between shock and something else. Something that looked remarkably like shame. "All this time," she said softly, "I never knew who to thank." John remained still, his posture unchanged. The same discipline that had kept him steady during countless missions now helped him weather this moment of recognition. He watched as Victoria Hale, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, struggled to reconcile the man she'd been dismissing with the one who had once saved her life. The air in the room felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Victoria's fingers traced unconsciously along her left wrist, where John knew she'd once worn restraints. He'd seen the marks himself that night, though he'd never mentioned them in any report. "Why didn't you say something immediately?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because that's not why I'm here," John replied simply. "I'm here because I believe I can contribute to your company's security. My experience isn't just about combat tactics, Miss Hale. It's about protecting people, assets, and interests, sometimes against impossible odds. It's about making decisions under pressure and living with their consequences." Victoria stood again, but this time without her earlier arrogance. She walked to the window, her reflection fragmented in the glass. The sun illuminated her face, and for a moment, John caught a glimpse of the woman they'd rescued. Vulnerable, human, stripped of pretense. She turned back to face him, and their eyes met across the expanse of her office. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared history and unspoken understanding. The color drained from Victoria Hale's face. Her manicured hand trembled as she set down John's resume. The pristine office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art, suddenly felt smaller, more confining. Her throat went dry as fragments of memory crashed through the careful walls she'd built around that terrible time. "You," she whispered, her voice losing its earlier sharp edge. "You were there." John sat quietly, his posture remaining respectfully straight, but non-threatening. He didn't need to say more. The truth hung heavy in the air between them. Victoria's mind raced back to those dark days. The musty blindfold, the rope burns on her wrists, the constant fear, then the chaos of gunfire and shouting, followed by a calm, steady voice in the darkness. A voice she now recognized. "I never saw your faces," she said softly, her fingers absently touching her neck where the blindfold had been. "They kept us blindfolded the whole time. But I remember your voice. You told me to stay calm, that everything would be okay." John nodded once, his expression gentle. "That's right, ma'am. My team and we did what needed to be done." Victoria pushed back from her desk, standing up to pace near the window. The city sprawled below, but she wasn't seeing it. 3 days. They held me for 3 days. And then you came." She turned back to face him, her expensive heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Why didn't you say something when you first came in?" "It wasn't relevant to the position, Miss Hale," John replied simply. "I'm here because I want to work, not because of what happened back then." Victoria sank back into her chair, shame coloring her cheeks. "And I just sat here and mocked your service record." She pressed her hands flat against the desk. "Mr. Carter, I don't even know how to begin to apologize." "No apology needed, ma'am. Please." She held up a hand. "Let me finish." She took a deep breath, composing herself. "I was arrogant and dismissive. I looked at your resume and saw what I wanted to see, or rather, what I didn't see. Corner offices, board meetings, profit margins." She gestured to the wall of business awards behind her desk. "I was measuring you against all this." John remained silent, his calm presence a stark contrast to Victoria's obvious distress. "The job is yours," she said firmly. "Of course it's yours. I can't believe I even hesitated." "Miss Hale," John's voice was gentle but firm, "I appreciate the offer, but I don't want the position out of guilt or obligation." Victoria straightened in her chair, some of her executive authority returning. "This isn't about guilt, Mr. Carter. This is about me recognizing that I made a serious error in judgment. You have exactly the kind of experience we need. Leadership under pressure, crisis management, strategic thinking. The fact that it was earned in combat rather than a boardroom doesn't make it any less valuable. She pulled out a leather folder from her desk drawer. In fact, it makes it more valuable. John considered her words carefully. My daughter, she's the reason I'm here. She deserves stability, a father with a regular job. But I need to know this is based on merit, not sympathy. Victoria's expression softened at the mention of his daughter. You have a child? Emily, John said, a slight smile warming his features. She's 14. Victoria nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. Then you know what it's like to want to protect someone more than anything in the world. She opened the folder, revealing employment papers. This job offer is about merit, Mr. Carter. About recognizing real leadership when I see it. Will you accept? John studied her face, seeing the sincerity there. After a moment, he reached for the papers.
Yes, ma'am. I will.
Victoria's relief was visible as she handed him a pen. Welcome to Hale Enterprises, Mr. Carter. When can you start? Monday works for me, he replied, signing his name with careful precision. After completing the paperwork, John stood to leave. Victoria rose as well, extending her hand. This time, there was no trace of her earlier condescension.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Not just for accepting the position, but for everything.
John shook her hand firmly. Just doing my job, ma'am. Then and now. He left Victoria's office with measured steps, waiting until he reached the privacy of the elevator before letting out a long breath. His hands were steady as he pulled out his phone and dialed Emily's number. She answered on the first ring. Dad, how did it go? Well, he paused, still processing everything that had happened. I got the job, sweetheart. Really? Emily's excitement bubbled through the phone. That's amazing. I knew you could do it. John smiled, hearing the pride in his daughter's voice. It's a fresh start for us, Em. A good one. When do you start? What's the office like? Is your boss nice? Monday, he answered, stepping out into the lobby. The office is fancy, lots of glass and chrome. And Miss Hale, well. He thought about the strange turn the interview had taken. She's complicated, but it's going to be okay, right? Emily asked, a hint of worry creeping into her voice. John pushed through the revolving doors, emerging into the bright afternoon sunlight. Yeah, honey, I think at Island. He looked up at the towering building behind him, feeling a mix of hope and uncertainty. I'll tell you all about it when I get home. The aroma of spaghetti and garlic bread filled their small apartment kitchen. John Carter stood at the worn countertop, carefully dividing the simple meal onto 2 mismatched plates, while Emily set their modest table. The overhead light flickered slightly, another thing he needed to fix when money wasn't so tight. Dad, you have to tell me everything. Emily bounced on her toes as she placed the paper napkins next to their plates. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes bright with excitement. What was her office like? Did she have one of those fancy coffee machines? John couldn't help but smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. Actually, she did. One of those European ones that looks more like a spaceship than a coffee maker. He carried their plates to the table, the pasta steaming. But I didn't get to try it. Emily slid into her chair, tucking one leg underneath her, a habit she'd had since she was little. But you got the job. That's what matters, right? She twirled spaghetti around her fork with practiced ease. No more night security shifts at the mall? No more night shifts, John confirmed, breaking off a piece of garlic bread. The butter melted into the warm crust, reminding him of simpler times when Sarah would bake fresh bread on Sunday afternoons. He pushed the memory aside gently. Regular hours, better pay, actual benefits. I knew you could do it. Emily's voice carried that pure, unshakable faith that only a child could have in their parent. Those fancy executives probably never met anyone like you before. Someone who's actually done real things, helped real people. John paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. The memory of Victoria Hale's face when he'd mentioned the rescue flashed through his mind. The shock, the recognition, the shame. Sometimes real things are complicated, sweetheart. Is this about what happened with Miss Hale? Emily's perception always surprised him. She might be only 15, but she could read him like a book. You got kind of quiet when you called to tell me about getting the job. John set his fork down, choosing his words carefully. Let's just say she and I had met before, in very different circumstances. It was unexpected for both of us. Was it during one of your missions? Emily leaned forward, pasta momentarily forgotten.
The ones you can't talk about?
He nodded slowly. Some things are better left in the past. But yes, our paths crossed once, years ago. He took a sip of water, buying time. The important thing is, I start Monday. Regular hours mean I can be home for dinner every night. Emily's face lit up. Really? No more microwave leftovers at midnight? Really? John reached across the table and squeezed her hand. And maybe we can finally fix up this place a bit. Get that new dresser you've been wanting. Dad, I don't care about furniture. Emily's voice grew serious, her hand tightening around his. I just want you to be happy. You deserve this. After everything. After Mom. She swallowed hard. I'm just really proud of you. The simple sincerity in her words hit John like a physical force. Here was his daughter, who'd lost her mother far too young, who'd dealt with his PTSD nightmares, who'd never complained about their tight budget or small apartment, telling him she was proud. His throat tightened. Come here, kiddo. He opened his arms, and Emily moved around the table, hugging him tight. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and that vanilla body spray she'd started wearing recently. I'm the proud one, he whispered into her hair. You've been so strong through everything. They finished dinner talking about lighter things. Emily's upcoming history test, the neighbor's new puppy, whether they should try growing herbs on their tiny balcony. It felt normal, peaceful, like maybe things were finally turning around. After dinner, Emily insisted on doing the dishes while John reviewed his new employee paperwork at the kitchen table. The corporate jargon swam before his eyes, terms of employment, non-disclosure agreements, benefit packages. It was a far cry from military contracts with their straightforward language and clear chain of command. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, John knelt beside his own bed. The springs creaked as he folded his hands, bowing his head in the darkness. Emily had left her door slightly ajar, as she often did, and he kept his voice barely above a whisper. Lord, I know I don't talk to you as often as I should, he began, his voice rough with emotion. But I need your guidance now more than ever. This isn't like anything I've faced before. No manual, no training for this kind of battlefield. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I don't know if I belong in their world. All those degrees on the wall, those power suits and corner offices. Sarah would know what to do. She always did. But I'm just a soldier. His voice cracked slightly. Please, help me be strong for Emily. Help me not mess this up. She believes in me so much, and I can't let her down. Not again. Unknown to John, Emily stood silently in the shadows of the hallway, her heart aching as she listened to her father's quiet prayers. Her strong, brave father, who had faced real battles and saved real lives, asking for help to navigate a world of spreadsheets and board meetings. She wanted to rush in and tell him he was wrong, that he belonged anywhere he chose to be. Instead, she crept back to her room, letting him have this private moment with his faith. Through the thin walls of their apartment, a police siren wailed in the distance. John remained kneeling, his head bowed, his whispered words mixing with the city sounds floating up from the street below. The morning sun reflected off the glass tower of Hale Enterprises as John Carter approached the building. His polished dress shoes clicked against the marble floor of the lobby. The security guard, Pete, according to his name tag, gave him a friendly nod. Morning, Mr. Carter. First day, right? Pete's warm smile put John at ease. Got your ID badge already here. Just John is fine, he replied, accepting the badge. And thanks, Pete. The elevator doors opened to the 14th floor, where human resources waited to process his paperwork. A young woman with curly hair and bright eyes greeted him. Mr. Carter, I'm Sarah from HR. She gestured to a nearby desk. Let's get you settled in. As Sarah walked him through the forms, other employees filtered past. Some offered welcoming smiles, while others barely glanced his way. A group of suited men huddled by the water cooler, stealing glances in his direction. Don't mind them, Sarah whispered, noticing his attention drift. Office gossip moves fast here, but you'll prove them wrong. John appreciated her kindness, but kept his expression neutral. He'd faced worse than workplace whispers. After HR, Sarah led him through a maze of cubicles toward the security department. Phones rang and keyboards clicked as they passed. Some employees stood to shake his hand. Welcome aboard. Nice to meet you. Looking forward to working with you. Their warmth felt genuine, though John caught fragments of other conversations. Heard he's a veteran. Victoria's pet project. Probably guilt over something. The security department occupied a corner of the floor. Several screens displayed camera feeds and security metrics. A team of analysts worked at their stations, some wearing headsets. "Team, this is John Carter, our new security director," Sarah announced. A broad-shouldered man in his 30s stepped forward. "Mike Reynolds, assistant director. Glad to have you on board, sir. Looking forward to working together," John replied, shaking his hand. Mike gave him a tour of the department, explaining their systems and protocols. John listened carefully, noting areas for improvement, but keeping his observations to himself. Better to learn the lay of the land first. "And this is your office," Mike said, opening a door. The space was modest but functional, with a desk, computer, and views of the city below. John set down his briefcase, remembering Emily's proud smile that morning. "Staff meeting in 10 minutes, Mike reminded him. "Want me to show you to the conference room? Lead the way." They walked past more cubicles. A woman, in an expensive suit, deliberately stepped aside as they passed, as if avoiding contact. Two men in ties lowered their voices, watching John with poorly concealed disdain. The conference room was already half full when they arrived. John took a seat near the middle, neither hiding in the back nor dominating the front. Years of military briefings had taught him to observe before acting. Victoria Hale entered last, commanding attention without effort. Her eyes met John's briefly before she began the meeting. "Good morning, everyone. First, please welcome John Carter, our new security director." A scatter of polite applause followed. John nodded in acknowledgement, keeping his posture relaxed but alert. The meeting covered quarterly goals, upcoming projects, and department updates. John noticed the subtle dynamics: who spoke with authority, who stayed silent, who rolled their eyes at other suggestions. When the meeting ended, Victoria approached him. "How's your first morning going, John?" "Fine, thank you." He kept his tone professional, neither warm nor cold. "Good. We'll meet later this week to discuss your vision for the department." As people filed out, John heard snippets of conversation. "Can't believe she hired him. Probably can't even use Excel. Just wait till he faces the board." Later, John headed to the break room for coffee. The machine was complicated, nothing like his simple pot at home, but he figured it out without asking for help. Two executives in expensive suits entered, apparently not noticing him by the counter. "Did you see the new security guy?" one said, loading a pot into the machine. "Guess Victoria's doing community service now." The other laughed. "Right? I mean, what's next? Hiring a janitor as CFO? Hey, he probably knows how to shine shoes really well. Military training and all that." John's jaw clenched, but he kept his movements steady as he stirred his coffee. His medals and scars meant nothing to them, but he'd faced worse than paper tigers in tailored suits. The executives continued their conversation, either oblivious to or uncaring of his presence. John remembered Emily's words that morning. "Show them who you really are, Dad." He would, not by confrontation or complaint, but through quiet competence and unwavering dignity, the same way he'd led his team through countless missions, with patience, discipline, and strength of character. Taking his coffee, John left the break room without acknowledging the executives. Their laughter followed him down the hall, but it didn't touch him. He had a job to do, and he would do it well. Not for them, not for Victoria, but for the same reason he'd always served. Because it was right. Back in his office, John opened his laptop and began reviewing security protocols. The whispers and mockery would continue, but so would he. One day at a time, one task at a time, just as he'd taught his team in the SEALs. The morning sun caught his wedding ring as he typed. Somewhere between the glass walls and polished floors of Hale Enterprises, John Carter, veteran, widower, father, began his new mission with quiet determination. The mahogany-paneled boardroom hummed with tension as Victoria Hale stood at the head of the long table. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp shadows across the faces of 12 board members who sat in expensive leather chairs, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. "Mr. Carter's military experience directly translates to corporate security," Victoria said, her voice firm but controlled. She gestured to the stack of papers before her. "His leadership record is impeccable." Richard Thornton, a silver-haired board member with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "With all due respect, Victoria, this isn't the military. We need someone who understands corporate culture, not combat zones." "I disagree," Victoria replied, straightening her navy blazer. John Carter's strategic thinking and crisis management skills are exactly what we need. He has zero corporate experience, Margaret Chen interrupted, tapping her pen against the polished table. No MBA, no business background. How can he possibly understand the complexities of protecting a Fortune 500 company? Victoria felt her jaw tighten. These were the same people who normally hung on her every word, but now they were challenging her judgment. Sometimes the best qualification isn't a degree, it's proven leadership under pressure. This isn't about degrees, Thomas Reynolds cut in, his thick Boston accent filling the room. It's about liability. What happens when the press gets wind that we hired a veteran with? He glanced down at his notes. Documented PTSD? Victoria's eyes flashed. That's completely out of line, Thomas. Is it? Margaret asked. We have shareholders to consider. Our stock could take a hit if people think we're making emotional hiring decisions. Emotional? Victoria's voice rose slightly. John Carter led elite teams in high-stakes situations. He's managed complex operations with multiple moving parts. That's exactly the kind of experience we need. Victoria, Richard said softly, using the tone one might take with an unreasonable child. We understand you feel a certain obligation to Mr. Carter, given your history. The room grew still. Everyone knew about the rescue, though it was never openly discussed. This has nothing to do with that, Victoria said, her words clipped. This is about hiring the most qualified person for the job. Then let's look at the other candidates, Thomas suggested, pulling out another folder. James Morrison has 15 years of corporate security experience, MBA from Wharton, currently heading security for a tech giant in Silicon Valley. Victoria shook her head. Morrison lacks real-world crisis experience. He's never had to make split-second decisions with lives on the line. That's exactly our point, Margaret interjected. We're not in a war zone. We need someone who understands corporate politics, not battlefield tactics. Outside the boardroom, John Carter stood perfectly still near the water cooler, his face impassive as the voices carried through the partially open door. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but now found himself unable to move away. Each word struck like a physical blow, though his expression never changed. Back in the boardroom, Victoria placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. I've made my decision. John Carter starts today as our new security director. You may have hired him, Richard said carefully, but this board has the authority to review and overturn executive decisions that could impact company stability. Are you threatening to override me? Victoria's voice was dangerously quiet. We're suggesting you reconsider, Margaret said diplomatically. Perhaps we could create a different position for Mr. Carter, something more suitable to his experience level. Victoria straightened up, her expression hard. I've never asked this board to trust my judgment blindly, but I'm asking now. John Carter will prove himself if given the chance. And if he doesn't? Thomas asked. If he fails, then I'll take full responsibility, Victoria answered firmly. Outside, John's hands clenched briefly at his sides, then relaxed. He'd faced worse doubts before, in SEAL training, in combat, in raising Emily alone. The words stung, but they also sparked something familiar in his gut, the quiet determination that had carried him through the darkest moments of his life. We'll give him 3 months, Richard finally conceded inside the boardroom. A probationary period. But if there are any issues, any at all, we'll need to make a change immediately. Victoria nodded curtly. Agreed. Now, shall we move on to the quarterly projections? As the conversation shifted to financial matters, John silently moved away from the door. His footsteps were soundless on the plush carpet as he walked down the hallway, back straight, head high. The doubt and dismissal he'd heard weren't new. He'd faced similar prejudice before. But this time, instead of anger, he felt a calm resolve settle over him. They wanted proof? He would give it to them. Not through arguments or explanations, but through action, the way he'd always proven himself. One day at a time, one challenge at a time, with the same quiet competence that had kept his teams alive in the world's most dangerous places. He reached his new office, a modest space with a window overlooking the city. On his desk sat a framed photo of Emily, her smile bright and confident. Next to it was his Navy SEAL trident, a reminder of everything he'd already overcome. The board member's words echoed in his mind. Zero corporate experience. Liability. Unsuitable. He'd heard similar doubts before stepping into his first combat mission, before adopting Emily as a single father, before every major challenge he'd faced and overcome. John sat down at his desk, pulled out a notepad, and began writing. He wouldn't waste energy defending himself or arguing his worth. Instead, he would do what he'd always done. Let his actions speak louder than any words could. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk as he worked, mapping out security protocols and response strategies with the same methodical precision he'd once used to plan missions. They might doubt his qualifications, but they couldn't doubt his results, not for long. The early morning sun had barely crested the horizon when John Carter stepped through the revolving doors of Hale Enterprises. The lobby was quiet, with only the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the soft footsteps of the cleaning crew breaking the silence. He liked these peaceful moments before the rush began. They reminded him of pre-mission preparations, when clarity of mind mattered most. John's polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he made his way to the security desk. Ted, the morning guard, straightened up when he saw him approach. "Morning, Mr. Carter," Ted said, offering a respectful nod. "Just John, please," he replied with a small smile. "How's the morning looking?" "Well, sir, John, we've got a situation brewing and receiving. 3 delivery trucks showed up at once, all claiming priority status. Loading docks in chaos." John's eyes narrowed slightly. "Show me the delivery manifests." Ted pulled up the information on his monitor. John studied the screen, his mind automatically shifting into tactical analysis mode, just as he'd done countless times in the field when resources were limited and decisions needed to be made quickly. These 2 shipments, he pointed at the screen, contain temperature-sensitive materials. The third is standard office supplies. He paused, considering. "Let's get eyes on the situation." Together, they walked to the loading dock, where raised voices and the rumble of idling engines filled the air. 3 frustrated drivers argued with Marcus, the receiving manager, whose face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is ridiculous," one driver shouted. "I've got frozen goods here." "Well, I've got sensitive lab equipment," another countered. John observed for a moment, taking in the layout of the dock, the position of each truck, and the growing crowd of agitated workers. He'd seen similar chaos in humanitarian missions. Different scenario, same human dynamics. "Marcus," John called out quietly, but his voice carried natural authority. The arguing stopped as heads turned toward him. "May I help?" The receiving manager looked relieved to see him. "Mr. Carter, thank God. This is a logistics puzzle," John finished, his calm demeanor already affecting those around him. "And every puzzle has a solution." He turned to the workers. "I need 3 teams. Team 1, clear Bay 2 completely. Move everything to the temporary storage area. Team 2, prepare the cold storage facility. Team 3, stage the office supplies in the holding area." His clear, precise instructions had an immediate effect. Workers who had been standing around uncertain began moving with purpose. "Sir," one of the younger workers raised his hand. "The cold storage facility is usually locked until 8. John nodded. "Call Angela in facilities. Her number is on the emergency contact list. Tell her John Carter needs access for priority deliveries." While the worker made the call, John turned to the truck drivers. "Gentlemen, we'll have you unloaded in the next 30 minutes. The frozen goods will go first, followed by the lab equipment, standard supplies last." He looked each man in the eye. "Will that work for everyone?" The drivers, who moments ago had been ready to come to blows, found themselves nodding in agreement. John stayed, quietly orchestrating the operation. He helped move boxes when needed, offered suggestions when workers struggled with heavy equipment, and kept everything flowing smoothly. His military experience had taught him that good leadership wasn't about shouting orders. It was about creating order from chaos through clear communication and leading by example. Up in her office, Victoria Hale stood at her window, coffee cup in hand, watching the scene unfold below. She'd arrived early to prepare for a conference call, only to witness John's handling of the situation. There was something fascinating about his approach. No grandstanding, no power plays, just quiet efficiency and natural leadership that brought out the best in those around him. She observed as workers who had been whispering about the charity hire just yesterday now gathered around John, listening intently as he explained a more efficient way to organize the loading dock. His suggestions were practical, drawn from his military experience in logistics, and adapted perfectly for civilian use. When the last truck pulled away, well ahead of schedule, Victoria noticed something remarkable. The workers weren't rushing to disperse as they usually did after a crisis. Instead, they were talking, smiling, showing a camaraderie that had been missing from the loading dock for years. John stood slightly apart, making notes on a clipboard. He wasn't seeking attention or praise for solving the problem. He simply did what needed to be done, then stepped back to let others take credit for the successful resolution. Victoria found herself remembering her own rescue years ago, how the SEAL team had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, resolved the situation with precise efficiency, then disappeared just as quietly. She was beginning to understand that John Carter's military experience wasn't a liability to be hidden or apologized for. It was an asset that brought a unique perspective to civilian challenges. As she watched, John shook hands with Marcus and headed back inside. The receiving manager was smiling for the first time in weeks, his earlier frustration completely forgotten. Several workers called out goodbyes to John, their respect evident in their tone. Victoria sipped her coffee thoughtfully. John's approach was unconventional by corporate standards. No meetings, no memos, no formal procedures being followed. Yet in less than an hour, he had solved a problem that had been plaguing the loading dock for months, while simultaneously earning the genuine respect of the workers. It was a leadership style she'd never encountered in the corporate world, where authority was usually enforced through titles and org charts. John led by example, with a quiet competence that made people want to follow rather than feel compelled to obey. Through the tinted glass, Victoria watched as John disappeared into the building, leaving behind a smoothly running operation and a group of employees who suddenly seemed more like a team than just co-workers. She set her coffee cup down, a thoughtful expression on her face as she considered this different kind of leadership that had just played out before her. At Mel's Corner Diner, the afternoon sun streamed through smudged windows, casting warm patches of light across the worn red vinyl booths. John Carter sat across from his daughter Emily, watching her push a French fry around her plate. The familiar smell of coffee and grilled onions filled the air, but today their usual comfort spot felt heavy with unspoken words. "Dad?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. She kept her eyes fixed on the half-eaten burger in front of her. Some kids at school were saying stuff today. John's heart tightened, but he kept his expression calm. "What kind of stuff, sweetheart?" Emily's shoulders hunched forward. "They said you only got the job because Mrs. Hale felt sorry for you, that you're not." She swallowed hard. "That you're not qualified enough to work there." John reached across the table and gently took his daughter's hand. Her small fingers were cold despite the warm diner air. "Hey, look at me for a second." When Emily raised her eyes, they were glossy with unshed tears. The sight made John's chest ache, but he smiled softly at her. "Let me tell you about something that happened during my SEAL training," he said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "There was this obstacle course we had to complete. Most guys would try to muscle through it, showing off how strong they were. But there was this one instructor, we called him Chief Morris, who taught me something I've never forgotten." Emily straightened slightly, her food forgotten. She'd always loved her father's Navy stories, especially the ones with life lessons woven into them. Chief Morris said, "Carter, sometimes the strongest person isn't the one making the most noise. Sometimes it's the quiet one who keeps going when everyone else has given up." John's voice grew softer, more reflective. "I wasn't the biggest guy in my class, or the fastest, but I learned that true strength isn't about what other people see on the surface." The waitress stopped by to refill John's coffee cup. Emily waited until she left before asking, "But how do you do it, Dad? How do you go to work every day when people are so mean?" John stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "You remember when we moved here after Mom passed? How hard those first few months were?" Emily nodded, her expression softening at the memory. "But we got through it together, didn't we? One day at a time." John leaned forward. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just show up, do our best, and let our actions speak for themselves. Like when you helped me learn to swim?" Emily's lips curved into a small smile. "I was so scared, but you said fear only wins if we let it." "Exactly." John's eyes crinkled at the corners. "And remember what happened? I became the fastest swimmer in my class," Emily said, sitting up straighter. "Because you didn't give up. You kept showing up at the pool, even when you were scared." John took a sip of his coffee. "That's what I'm doing now at Hale Enterprises. People can say what they want, But at the end of the day, it's not their opinions that matter. Emily tilted her head. What matters then? What matters is knowing who we are and what we stand for. John's voice grew firm but gentle. In the SEALs, we had a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. It means that challenges make us stronger, even when they're hard. Especially when they're hard. Like that time your team had to carry those heavy logs during training? Emily asked, remembering another of her father's stories. Just like that. We succeeded because we worked together, trusted each other, and never gave up. John smiled. And you know what? Those were the lessons that really mattered. Not how much we could lift or how fast we could run. Emily pushed her plate aside, sitting up straighter.
So, when kids at school say mean things,
we remember that their words can only hurt us if we let them, John finished. We stand tall, keep our heads high, and let our actions speak louder than their words. Like you do at work, like I do at work. John nodded. Every day I focus on doing my job the best I can. That's all any of us can do. Our best. Emily was quiet for a moment, processing her father's words. Then she stood up from her side of the booth and walked around to his side. Without saying anything, she wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug, burying her face in his shoulder. Thanks, Dad, she whispered. I think I understand now. John held his daughter close, feeling the familiar surge of love and protection that had guided him through every challenge since becoming a single father. When Emily pulled back, her eyes were clear and determined, no longer clouded with doubt. Ready to head home? John asked, reaching for his wallet. Emily stood tall, squaring her shoulders in a way that reminded John so much of her mother. Ready, she said firmly, and wrapped him in another hug before they prepared to leave the diner. The ordinary Tuesday morning at Hale Enterprises shattered when piercing alarms cut through the usual office chatter. Red emergency lights flashed across the pristine walls of the 40-story building, casting an eerie glow over suddenly panicked faces. John Carter's head snapped up from his desk, his military instincts kicking in instantly. While others froze, his mind cleared with familiar focus. The chaos around him slowed to a manageable rhythm as years of training took over. Everyone remain calm, he commanded, his voice carrying across the floor with quiet authority. The scattered employees turned toward him, finding stability in his steady presence. This is not a drill. We're going to evacuate in an orderly fashion. Through the growing commotion, security alerts flashed across computer screens. Someone had breached the building's main server room. John's radio crackled with scattered reports of unauthorized access on multiple floors. Victoria Hale burst from her office, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of worry. John, we have sensitive data. I know, he replied calmly, already moving. Get your people out first. I'll handle the rest. He keyed his radio, speaking in clear, measured tones. Security team, implement Protocol Delta. I want guards at all stairwell exits and elevator banks. Engineering, lock down the server rooms on floors 12 through 15. The security guards, usually dismissive of the military guy, responded immediately to the natural authority in his voice. Through his earpiece, John heard confirmations as his orders were carried out. Turning to the growing crowd of nervous employees, he raised his voice. Listen up. We're evacuating in groups of 20. Follow your floor wardens to the nearest stairwell. Stay together. No elevators. If you have visitors, keep them with you. A young intern started to cry, clutching her purse. John placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You're going to be fine. Sarah here will walk with you. He nodded to a more experienced employee who stepped forward to help. As groups began moving toward the stairs, John's trained eye caught movement on the security cameras. 3 figures in maintenance uniforms were moving against the flow of evacuation, heading up instead of down. Victoria, he called. Get down to the lobby with the next group. I need you visible to keep people calm. She started to protest, but saw something in his expression that made her pause. Be careful, she said instead, surprising them both with her concern. John moved swiftly through the emptying floors, coordinating with his team through short radio bursts. Teams 2 and 3. Converge on floor 14. Possible hostiles in maintenance gear moving up. Cole, lock down all access points to the executive floors. The stairwells filled with the orderly sound of hundreds of feet descending. John's training had kicked in automatically. Protect the civilians first, then secure the asset. In this case, The company's servers held millions in intellectual property and client data. He caught up to the intruders on the 15th floor. They wore authentic-looking uniforms, but John spotted the inconsistencies immediately. Wrong shoes, no ID badges, movements too purposeful for regular maintenance workers. "Stop right there," he commanded, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. The men spun, reaching for concealed weapons. John moved before they could draw, his body remembering countless close-quarter combat drills. He struck the first man's wrist, sending a concealed taser clattering across the floor. The second attacker rushed him, but John sidestepped, using the man's momentum to slam him into the wall. The third intruder pulled back, reaching for something in his pocket. John's hand shot out, gripping the man's arm with iron strength. "I wouldn't," he said quietly. Security teams pounded up the stairs, surrounding the subdued intruders. John supervised as they were cuffed and searched, finding sophisticated hacking equipment and building schematics. "Clear the building floor by floor," he ordered his teams. "I want every room checked before we give the all clear." Down in the lobby, Victoria watched the security feeds with growing amazement as John methodically contained the threat. His movements were precise, his commands clear and confident. This was not the same man the board had dismissed as unqualified. After 30 tense minutes, John's voice came over the building's PA system. "The building is secure. All threats have been contained. Please return to your floors in an orderly fashion. Security teams will verify IDs at all entrances." As employees filed back in, the mood had shifted dramatically. People pointed at the security cameras, describing how they had watched John take down the intruders. Others shared stories of how his calm leadership had prevented panic during the evacuation. Victoria stood in the lobby, watching as John descended the stairs with his security team, the handcuffed intruders between them. Local police were already waiting to take custody. Employees gathered in the atrium broke into spontaneous applause. John looked uncomfortable with the attention, but he couldn't avoid the waves of gratitude. A young woman from accounting stepped forward to thank him personally, tears in her eyes as she described how his presence had helped her handle her anxiety during the evacuation. "Just doing my job," he said quietly, but the words carried weight now. This was exactly the job he had been trained to do: protect people, maintain order, lead under pressure. Victoria approached him as the police led the suspects away. She had witnessed the entire incident from the security feeds, seen how his military experience had transformed into exactly what the company needed. "I don't know what we would have done without you today," she said, her usual corporate polish giving way to genuine respect. John met her gaze steadily. "You hired me to protect this company and its people. That's what I did." More employees gathered around, sharing their relief and gratitude. The same executives who had whispered about his qualifications now stood back, reassessing their judgments. John had proved himself not through boardroom politics or corporate credentials, but through decisive action and unwavering leadership. As the crowd dispersed and normal operations resumed, Victoria noticed how John deflected praise and instead checked on his security teams, ensuring they were properly rotated for breaks after the crisis. She watched him move through the lobby with quiet confidence and felt something shift in her perspective. This was a different kind of leadership, one built on service, competence, and genuine care for others. The morning's events had demonstrated something no resume could capture. The true measure of a person revealed itself not in titles or credentials, but in moments of crisis when others looked for someone to lead the way. Victoria stood at the podium in the company's grand conference room, her usual commanding presence softened by genuine warmth. The room buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of employees filled every seat and lined the walls. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow over the assembled crowd. "Yesterday's security breach could have been catastrophic," Victoria began, her voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "But thanks to one person's exceptional leadership, every single employee made it home safely to their families." John shifted uncomfortably in his chair in the front row. He wasn't used to public recognition. In the SEALs, missions were classified, and heroes remained unnamed. "John Carter," Victoria continued, gesturing for him to join her at the podium. "Please stand up." The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous crescendo. John rose, straightening his navy blue suit jacket, still not quite as comfortable as his old uniform, but getting there. As he walked to the stage, he caught glimpses of familiar faces, Sarah from HR, who'd helped him navigate the employee handbook, Mike from IT, who'd patiently explained the computer systems, and dozens of others he'd quietly assisted over the past weeks. What Mr. Carter did yesterday wasn't just about following security protocols, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. He showed us what true leadership looks like. When others panicked, he remained calm. When we needed direction, he provided it with clarity and confidence. John stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back in parade rest, an old habit that brought comfort in moments of attention. But more than that, Victoria continued, he proved something I should have known from the beginning, that the qualities that make an exceptional soldier, courage, integrity, and dedication to others are exactly what we need in the corporate world. She turned to face him directly. I was wrong about you, John, and I'm grateful every day that you chose to give us a chance. The applause erupted again, and this time John noticed something different. The executive board members who'd once questioned his qualifications were standing, clapping with genuine respect. The whispers that had followed him through the halls had transformed into smiles and nods of appreciation. Victoria handed him the microphone, but John kept his words brief, as he always had. I just did what needed to be done, he said simply. Same as any of you would have done. Same as I was trained to do. Thank you. As the meeting dispersed, employees stopped to shake his hand or pat his shoulder. Some shared personal thanks for specific moments during the crisis. How his calm instructions had helped them keep their heads. How his strategic thinking had prevented panic. Later that afternoon, John sat in his office, still processing the morning's events. His phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Dad, Sarah from your office called Mom's old friend at the newspaper. You're on their website. Local veteran prevents corporate crisis. So proud of you, Kediga. A knock at his door interrupted his reply. It was Victoria. Got a minute? She asked, more casual than he'd ever seen her. Of course. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I meant what I said this morning, she began, settling into the seat. But there's something else. The board met after the assembly. We're creating a new position, Director of Corporate Leadership Development. We'd like you to take it. John blinked in surprise. Ma'am, please, it's Victoria, she smiled. We want you to teach others what you know about crisis management, team building, and leadership. Your military experience isn't just relevant to our work, it's invaluable. For the first time since hanging up his uniform, John felt his two worlds merging, not competing. I'd be honored, he said quietly. The paperwork will be ready tomorrow. Victoria stood, extending her hand. Welcome to the executive team, John. As the workday wound down, John gathered his things, nodding to the security guard at the front desk. Not as a fellow security officer now, but as something new, something he hadn't expected to become. The drive home was lighter somehow, as if a weight he'd carried since leaving the service had finally lifted. He pulled into the parking lot of Mario's Pizza, Emily's favorite since she was little, and called her. Hey, sweetheart, I'm picking up dinner. The usual? Extra pepperoni and those garlic knots? Her voice bubbled with excitement. Best celebration dinner ever. 20 minutes later, John pushed open their apartment door, balancing pizza boxes and sodas. Emily bounded from the couch, her dark hair swinging as she rushed to help him. Dad, I can't believe it. You're like actually famous now. She grabbed plates from the kitchen, chattering happily. Maddie showed everyone at school the article, and even Mr. Peterson mentioned it in history class when we were talking about everyday heroes. They settled onto their worn but comfortable couch, the coffee table serving as their dining room. Emily folded her slice New York style, just like her mother used to, and John felt a familiar, bittersweet warmth at the gesture. You know what's funny? Emily said between bites. Remember when you were worried about fitting in there? And now they're all trying to be more like you. John chuckled, reaching for another slice. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Mom would be so proud, Emily said softly. I mean, she always was, but you know what I mean. I know, sweetie. John wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pizza forgotten for a moment. I think she'd be even prouder of you, the way you've handled everything, how you've kept me going. Emily leaned into his embrace, then straightened up with a grin. So, does this mean we can finally get a dog? Now that you're a big executive and all? John laughed, a full, deep laugh he hadn't used in ages. We'll see. Maybe we should start with a fish. A fish? Emily's mock outrage sent them both into fits of laughter. Dad, you literally saved an entire building. I think you can handle a puppy. They spent the rest of the evening sharing pizza and stories, the TV forgotten in favor of real conversation. Emily insisted on hearing every detail about the ceremony, and John found himself sharing more than usual, caught up in her enthusiasm. John's morning ritual hadn't changed in 15 years. Up at 500, coffee brewing, newspaper on the kitchen table. But today, something was different. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, each one making his stomach twist a little tighter. The headline on his screen made his coffee go cold. Unstable vet-led security at Hale Enterprises. Hidden past of PTSD and tragedy raises concerns. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the article. Personal details about his service, his struggles after returning home, and worst of all, intimate details about Sarah's death. Information he'd shared only in confidence with the company's HR department during his hiring process. The article painted a picture he knew all too well from other veterans' stories. The wounded warrior, too broken for civilian life. The widower, haunted by loss. Every word twisted his accomplishments into potential liabilities. Dad? Emily's voice startled him. She stood in her school uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder. You okay? You look pale. John quickly locked his phone screen. Just fine, sweetheart. Ready for school? But Emily was already reaching for her own phone, her face falling as notifications popped up. Friends sharing the article, tagging her name. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, her eyes widening. Dad, how could they? This isn't fair. Her voice cracked. They're lying about you. John moved to her side, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Some people, he said carefully, they don't understand what service means, or what it costs. Emily's eyes welled with tears. But they're talking about Mom. How dare they use Mom like this? The article had indeed mentioned Sarah, describing her death in a car accident while John was deployed. They'd twisted it into a narrative about guilt and instability, suggesting John's PTSD stemmed from not being there when his wife needed him most. John's phone rang. Victoria Hale's name flashed on the screen. Emily, you need to get to school. We'll talk about this tonight, okay? But Dad, remember what we always say about storms? Emily wiped her eyes. Weather them with dignity. That's my girl. He hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. I love you. Love you too, Dad. After Emily left, John answered Victoria's call. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. John, I'm so sorry. We're trying to trace the leak. The board is meeting in an hour. It was Marcus Reynolds, wasn't it? John's voice was calm, but firm. Marcus, the head of operations, had opposed his hiring from day one. Victoria's pause confirmed it. We're investigating, but... Yes, it appears the information came from his office. John sat heavily in his kitchen chair, looking at Sarah's photo on the wall. Her smile, frozen in time, seemed to give him strength. Victoria, I won't resign. John, the board. My PTSD doesn't define me. Neither does my grief. If anything, they've made me stronger, more aware, more capable of handling crisis. You saw that yesterday. At Hale Enterprises, the whispers started the moment John walked through the lobby. Eyes darted away when he looked up. Conversations hushed as he passed. The security team, usually quick with morning greetings, seemed unsure how to act around him. In his office, John found printouts of the article on his desk, an anonymous gift. He calmly dropped them in the recycling bin and got to work, reviewing security protocols as if it were any other day. Marcus Reynolds walked past his office twice, a barely concealed smirk on his face. John kept working. By mid-morning, the board meeting was in full swing. John could see them through the glass walls of the conference room, gesturing animatedly. Victoria stood at one end, arms crossed, clearly arguing in his defense. His phone buzzed again. A text from Emily. Dad, everyone at school is talking. Their parents saw the article. Jenny's mom said you shouldn't be allowed to work with normal people. I hate them. I hate this. John's heart clenched. He started typing a response when his office door opened. It was Linda from HR, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Carter, the board requests your presence. He straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, habits from his service days that now felt like armor. As he walked to the conference room, he heard snippets of conversation. Liability, public relations nightmare. What if he snaps? The board members fell silent as he entered. Their faces showed a mix of pity, concern, and in some cases, barely disguised contempt. Victoria's expression was apologetic. Before anyone could speak, John's phone buzzed again. A text from Emily's teacher. "Mr. Carter, Emily left class in tears. Several students were sharing inappropriate comments about your personal situation. She ran out of the building. We're very concerned." The world seemed to stop. Board meeting, leaked articles, workplace politics, none of it mattered. His daughter needed him. "Excuse me," he said quietly, already turning to leave. "My daughter needs me." "Mr. Carter, this meeting is mandatory," one board member protested. John paused at the door, his voice steady. "With all due respect, nothing is more mandatory than being there for my child. Judge me for my PTSD if you must. Question my ability to serve this company. But never question my priorities as a father." He strode through the office, ignoring the stares and whispers. In the lobby, he heard running footsteps. Emily burst through the revolving doors, face streaked with tears, and threw herself into his arms. "They said horrible things, Dad," she sobbed into his chest. "About you, about Mom, about everything." John held her close, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. Around them, employees pretended not to watch, but he could feel their stares. For once, he didn't care about appearing strong. He just held his daughter, letting her cry, being the father she needed him to be. The emergency board meeting notification came just after 9. John's footsteps echoed through the marble lobby of Hale Enterprises, the same building that had felt like a symbol of hope just days ago. Now, every reflective surface seemed to mock him, showing fragments of a man trying to hold himself together. Security guards, who usually nodded respectfully, now averted their eyes. The elevator ride to the top floor stretched into an eternity of soft muzak and shifting feet. John stood perfectly still, the way he'd learned in the service, when in doubt, maintain bearing. The boardroom doors loomed ahead, heavy oak panels that probably cost more than his annual salary. Inside, 14 faces turned to watch him enter. Some wore masks of concern. Others barely concealed their satisfaction. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her usual commanding presence diminished by the tension in her shoulders. "Mr. Carter," said Harrison Wells, the board's vice chairman, "please, take a seat." John chose a chair halfway down the table, keeping his back straight and face neutral. A stack of newspapers sat in the center of the polished wood surface. His life, his pain, his private struggles splashed across the headlines in bold black ink. "I assume you've seen this morning's news," Wells continued, sliding one paper forward. "Disturbing allegations have come to light about your mental fitness for this position." Victoria's hand clenched around her pen. "These are private medical records that were illegally obtained, which raises additional security concerns," interrupted another board member, a woman with steel gray hair. "If his personal information was so easily accessed, what does that say about our corporate data?" John's jaw tightened. They were talking about him like he wasn't even there, like he was a problem to be solved rather than a person sitting right in front of them. "My PTSD has been properly treated and documented," John said quietly but firmly. "It has never interfered with my ability to perform my duties, either in the service or here. The issue isn't just the PTSD, Mr. Carter." Wells leaned forward. "It's the pattern of instability. The violent incidents in your service record. Those were combat situations," Victoria cut in sharply. "He was doing his job protecting people like us." "And the death of your wife?" Wells continued as if Victoria hadn't spoken. "That kind of trauma?" John's chair scraped back before he consciously decided to stand. The room fell silent. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but it carried the weight of every battle he'd ever fought. "My wife died of cancer 6 years ago. I watched her fight with more courage than anyone in this room has ever shown. And then I raised our daughter alone while dealing with the scars of service that I earned, protecting people who never had to see what I saw." He looked each board member in the eye. "If you want to question my qualifications, fine. But don't you dare use my wife's death or my sacrifice for this country as weapons against me." Victoria stood too, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. John has proven himself repeatedly. The board has made its decision, Wells announced flatly. Mr. Carter, you are suspended pending a full review of your employment. Please surrender your security credentials to HR on your way out. The words hit like physical blows, but John's military bearing held. He reached into his jacket, removed his security badge, and placed it carefully on the table. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. "John, wait," Victoria called after him. He paused in the doorway but didn't turn around. "Thank you for trying, Miss Hale, but we both know some battles can't be won." The walk through the office was a gauntlet of whispers and stares. Employees who'd cheered him yesterday now found their computer screens fascinating. His desk looked exactly as he'd left it that morning. A photo of Emily, his service medal in its case, a half-drunk cup of coffee now gone cold. He packed quickly, efficiently, the way he'd learned to pack under fire. The box felt too light in his arms as he rode the elevator down, as if 15 years of service could be reduced to so little. The drive home passed in a blur. He found himself sitting on his living room couch as evening shadows crept across the walls. His old dress uniform hung in its garment bag in the open closet, medals catching the last rays of sunlight. John unzipped the bag with trembling fingers, running his hand over the crisp fabric. The weight of those medals had once meant something. Now they felt like anchors, pulling him down into darker waters. The front door opened and closed softly. Emily's footsteps padded across the carpet, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her, couldn't bear to see disappointment in her eyes. The couch dipped as she sat beside him. For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the shadows deepen across his folded uniform. Then Emily's small hand covered his, warm and steady. "The only easy day was yesterday," she whispered, quoting the SEAL motto he'd taught her years ago. The simple words, spoken with such faith, made something crack inside him. A single tear rolled down his cheek as his daughter's hand tightened around his, holding him together when everything else was falling apart. The morning sun filtered through the worn curtains of the Carter apartment, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. John sat at the table, staring into his untouched coffee. His phone lay silent beside him. No calls from the office, no messages from colleagues who'd shared laughs with him just days ago. The newspaper on the counter remained folded and unopened. He couldn't bear to see if there were any more stories about him. Emily appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school in her favorite blue sweater and jeans. Her backpack was nowhere in sight. "Dad," she said firmly, "we're going out for breakfast." John glanced up, surprised by her tone. "Honey, I don't think—" "No excuses." Emily crossed her arms, looking so much like her mother that it made his heart ache. "You always told me that Carters don't hide when things get tough." A weak smile tugged at his lips. "Did I say that?" "About 1,000,000 times." She walked over and tugged at his arm. "Come on, you haven't even changed out of yesterday's clothes." John looked down at his rumpled dress shirt, the one he'd worn to that awful board meeting. He hadn't bothered changing before falling into a restless sleep on the couch. "Give me 10 minutes, he conceded. In the shower, the hot water helped wash away some of the fog from his sleepless night. Emily was right. Hiding at home wouldn't solve anything. He changed into jeans and a clean navy sweater, running a comb through his short hair more out of habit than vanity. They walked 3 blocks to Mary's Diner, a local spot they'd frequented since Emily was little. The morning air was crisp, carrying the first hints of autumn. A few early joggers passed them, and John found himself automatically scanning for threats, old habits that had kept him alive in war zones. The diner's bell chimed as they entered. Mary herself was behind the counter, her gray hair tucked under a hairnet. "John, Emily, haven't seen you two in a while." "Hi, Mary," Emily chirped, leading her father to their usual booth by the window. They ordered their usual chocolate chip pancakes for Emily, eggs, and hash browns for John. As Mary poured their coffee, hot chocolate for Emily, John noticed his daughter studying him with an intensity that reminded him of mission briefings. "Okay, spill it," he said, stirring cream into his coffee. "What's on your mind?" Emily wrapped her hands around her mug. "Remember last year when I wanted to quit the debate team?" John nodded. It had been a rough time. Emily had frozen during her first competition, and the other kids had been merciless. "You told me that running away would only make the fear bigger," she continued. "You said that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is show up again the next day." "That was different, sweetheart." "Was it?" Emily leaned forward. You taught me that we don't quit just because things get hard. You showed me that by example every single day since Mom died. John's throat tightened. Mary arrived with their food, but he barely noticed. When you lost Mom, Emily's voice softened. You could have given up, but you didn't. You learned to braid my hair even though you were terrible at it at first. She smiled at the memory. You came to every school event, helped with every project, even when I know you were exhausted from work. That's different. You're my daughter, and you're my dad. Emily's eyes welled with tears, but her voice remained steady. You've always been my hero, not because you were a SEAL, but because you never stopped trying. Those people at your company, they don't know you. They don't know how you volunteer at the Veterans Center or how you help Mrs. Rodriguez carry her groceries up 3 flights of stairs. Their food grew cold as Emily continued. Remember what you told me about your SEAL training? About the bell? John nodded slowly. The bell that candidates could ring to quit during Hell Week? Its ring meant surrender, meant giving up on yourself and your team. You didn't ring it then, Emily said. Don't ring it now. The simple wisdom of her words hit him like a physical force. Here he was, ready to retreat into himself, while his teenage daughter showed more courage than he'd felt in days. When did you get so smart? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I had a good teacher. Emily reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Those board members, they think they know what strength is because they make million-dollar deals. But real strength? That's getting up every day and doing what's right, even when it's hard. That's what you taught me. John looked at his daughter, really looked at her. Somehow, while he'd been busy trying to protect her, she'd grown into someone who could protect him right back. Her faith in him was stronger than any medal he'd earned, more valuable than any corporate title. The pancakes are getting cold, Emily said with a gentle smile. John picked up his fork, feeling something shift inside him. The weight of yesterday's humiliation began to lift, replaced by a familiar determination, the kind that had carried him through BUD-S training, through combat, through losing his wife. You know what? He said, taking a bite of his now cold eggs. You're right, I know, Emily grinned. I'm always right. You should be used to it by now. John chuckled, a genuine laugh that felt foreign after the past few days. As they finished their breakfast, he realized that while he'd spent years being Emily's anchor, somewhere along the way, she had become his. Victoria Hale sat at her mahogany desk, staring at the framed magazine covers celebrating her success. Her fingers traced the edge of one featuring her triumphant smile beneath the headline, America's Most Powerful CEO. The glass felt cold beneath her touch, as cold as her heart had been that day in the interview room with John Carter. The setting sun cast long shadows across her corner office. She hadn't left since the board meeting where they'd suspended John. The weight of her silence during that vote pressed heavily on her shoulders. Ma'am? Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Security needs to do their final rounds. Will you be leaving soon? Victoria pressed the button. Not yet, Janet. I need more time. She stood and walked to the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. The same city where, years ago, she'd returned after her rescue, after John and his team had saved her life. She'd buried those memories so deep, convinced herself that success and power were the only shields she needed. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone. The screen showed dozens of missed calls from board members, all probably warning her to stay away from the John Carter situation. She ignored them and dialed Janet's extension. Call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp. But Miss Hale, several board members are traveling. Then they'll dial in remotely. Make it happen. Her voice carried the steel that had made her famous. And Janet? Mark it as mandatory attendance. After hanging up, Victoria sank into her chair and opened her laptop. The leaked article about John's PTSD and his wife's death filled the screen. The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. Not of sadness, but of shame. She remembered the terror of her captivity, the hopelessness that had nearly crushed her. Then came the sounds of combat, and eventually, a calm voice telling her she was safe. She'd never seen the faces of her rescuers clearly, but now she knew one of them had been John Carter. Victoria pulled up the company's personnel files. John's military record was there, heavily redacted but still impressive. Multiple commendations, leadership roles, successful missions. But what caught her eye were the testimonials from his team members. Would follow him into hell itself. Never left anyone behind. Taught us that true strength comes from serving others. Her computer chimed with incoming emails. Board members complaining about the short notice. She ignored them all. Instead, she opened a blank document and began typing, "Distinguished board members, I stand before you today not just as your CEO, but as someone who has failed this company's core values." The words came slowly at first, then faster. She wrote about integrity, about judgment clouded by pride, about a man who had saved her life, only to be mocked and dismissed years later because she'd forgotten what real courage looked like. Hours passed. Janet left a sandwich that went untouched. Victoria wrote and rewrote, pouring her heart onto the screen. When she finally finished, she walked to the full-length mirror in her private bathroom. The woman who stared back looked different from the polished CEO on those magazine covers. Her mascara was smudged, her designer blazer wrinkled, but her eyes held something new, humility and purpose. She smoothed her hair and began to practice her speech. "I was wrong," she said to her reflection, voice shaking. "We were all wrong about John Carter." The words caught in her throat. She started again, stronger this time. "This company claims to value integrity, courage, and leadership. Yet when a man who embodies all these qualities stood before us, we saw only what we wanted to see." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she kept going. "I'm not asking you to give him his job back. I'm telling you that if he goes, I go too, because I cannot lead a company that rejects the very principles it claims to uphold." Victoria wiped her eyes, smearing expensive makeup across her sleeve. She didn't care. Tomorrow would change everything. Her reputation, possibly her career, but for the first time in years, she felt truly worthy of her position. She practiced the speech again and again, each time with more conviction. The night grew deeper, but she stayed, rehearsing words that might save more than just John's job. They might save the soul of her company and her own. In the mirror, tears glistened on her cheeks as she prepared to sacrifice everything she'd built for a man who had once sacrificed everything to save her. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hale Enterprises boardroom, casting long shadows across the polished table. Victoria Hale stood at its head, her usual confident posture masking the nervous flutter in her stomach. Around her sat 12 board members, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Through the glass walls, she could see a growing crowd of employees gathering in the atrium below. Many held handmade signs supporting John Carter. The sight strengthened her resolve. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Victoria began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've called this emergency meeting to address our grievous error in suspending John Carter." Arnold Matthews, a senior board member, leaned forward with a frown. "Miss Hale, we've been through this. The publicity risks—" "No," Victoria cut him off, something she'd never done before. The boardroom fell silent. "Today, you will listen to me, not as your CEO, but as someone whose life was saved by the man we so casually dismissed." She took a deep breath and moved to the window, gesturing at the gathering below. "Look at our people. They're not here because of corporate mandate or obligation. They're here because John Carter showed them what true leadership looks like." Victoria turned back to face the board, her shoulders straight. "Years ago, I was kidnapped overseas. I never told any of you the full story because I wanted to forget it happened. I wanted to pretend I was always this polished, successful woman you see before you." Her voice wavered slightly. "I spent 3 days in darkness, certain I would die. When rescue came, I didn't see faces, just shadows moving with precision and purpose. One of those shadows was John Carter." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger. "And how did I repay him? When he came seeking honest work, I mocked his service. I belittled his experience. I acted as if leading men in life-or-death situations was somehow less valuable than managing profit margins." She pulled out a folder and began distributing documents. "These are reports from every department head since John joined us. Security incidents down 40%, employee morale up, crisis response time cut in half. He did this while enduring whispers, mockery, and prejudice." Martha Chen, another board member, Study the reports with widening eyes. These numbers are impressive, but his personal history. His personal history? Victoria's voice rose with controlled passion. You mean losing his wife? Raising a daughter alone? Wrestling with the psychological cost of protecting ungrateful people like me? Yes, let's talk about that history. She walked slowly around the table, making eye contact with each member. John Carter's PTSD isn't a liability. It's a testament to his humanity. He has seen the worst of humanity yet chosen to believe in its best. While we've been trading stocks, he's been trading his life for others. Through the windows, the crowd in the atrium had grown larger. Someone had started a chant. Bring Carter back. Victoria pulled out one final document. This is my letter of resignation, effective immediately if you don't reinstate John Carter. But not just as security director, as our new executive advisor on leadership and crisis management. Gasps echoed around the table. Arnold Matthews sputtered. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, Victoria stated firmly. I've spent years building this company's wealth. John Carter spent years building something far more valuable. Character. It's time we acknowledged which one matters more. She placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. We have an opportunity here. We can continue being just another soulless corporation, or we can become something more. John Carter isn't just a hire. He's a symbol of everything we should aspire to be. The boardroom fell silent, except for the muffled chants from below. Victoria straightened up, smoothing her blazer. I'll give you 10 minutes to decide. Either John Carter returns with expanded responsibilities, or I walk. And I promise you, half of our workforce will follow. She turned and walked toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. One more thing. The executive who leaked John's personal information? He's sitting at this table. I have proof. So when you vote, remember, I'm not the only one whose position is at stake today. Several board members paled, glancing nervously at each other. Victoria stepped out, closing the door behind her. She walked to the window, overlooking the atrium, watching the gathered employees. Their signs, their chants, their unity, it all testified to John's impact. 10 minutes later, she returned to find the board members in hushed discussion. Arnold Matthews cleared his throat as she took her place at the head of the table. We've taken a vote, he announced, his voice formal but subdued. Victoria held her breath, her hand instinctively touching the resignation letter in her pocket. Below, the chants grew louder. Bring Carter back! Bring Carter back! Martha Chin spoke up, a small smile playing at her lips. The vote is unanimous. John Carter is to be reinstated immediately as security director and appointed as executive advisor on leadership and crisis management, with full benefits and back pay for his suspension period. Victoria's shoulders relaxed slightly, but she maintained her professional demeanor. And the board member responsible for the leak has resigned, effective immediately, Arnold replied, sliding a letter across the table. Victoria nodded, then pressed the intercom button on the conference phone. Please ask John Carter to join us in the boardroom. The crowd in the atrium erupted in cheers as John's figure appeared, making his way through the gathered employees. Victoria watched him approach, remembering that dark night years ago when he had led her to safety. Now, in his own way, he was leading them all towards something better, a company with not just profits, but principles. The company auditorium buzzed with anticipation as employees filed in, filling every seat. Afternoon light filtered through high windows, casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd. Emily sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching as Victoria approached the podium. Today, Victoria began, her voice carrying through the space, I have the honor of introducing someone who has taught us all a valuable lesson about character. She paused, looking directly at John, who sat quietly off to the side. Mr. John Carter. John rose slowly from his chair, straightening his navy suit jacket. As he walked to the podium, his footsteps echoed in the now silent hall. He hadn't prepared anything fancy. That wasn't his style. Years of military briefings had taught him that truth needed no embellishment. Standing at the podium, John's steady gaze swept across the sea of faces. He saw the security guards he'd trained, the office workers he'd protected, and even the executives who had once doubted him. His eyes finally settled on Emily, who gave him an encouraging smile. When I first walked through the doors of Hale Enterprises, John began, his deep voice calm and measured. "I carried my military service like a weight. I thought it was something I needed to hide or apologize for." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I was wrong." The audience leaned forward, drawn in by his quiet intensity. Even those who had been checking their phones now looked up, captivated. You see, service isn't just about wearing a uniform or carrying a weapon. It's about putting others before yourself. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. These aren't just military values. They're human values. In the front row, Emily watched her father transform. Gone was the uncertain man who had doubted himself at their kitchen table. In his place stood someone who finally understood his own worth. "Life has taught me about sacrifice," John continued, his voice softening as he thought of his late wife. "It's taught me about loss. But most importantly, it's taught me about resilience." He squared his shoulders. "Every morning in SEAL training, we faced challenges that seemed impossible. But we had a saying, the only easy day was yesterday." Several employees wiped their eyes, touched by the raw honesty in his words. Even Victoria, standing to the side, dabbed at her cheeks with a tissue. "When I was suspended," John acknowledged, addressing the elephant in the room, "I almost gave up. I almost believed those who said I didn't belong here." His eyes found Emily again. "But my daughter reminded me of something important. Our past doesn't define us. Our response to challenges does." Emily's eyes welled with tears of pride as her father continued. "Second chances aren't about pity." John's voice grew stronger. "They're about recognition. Recognition that everyone has value. That experience comes in many forms. That character matters more than credentials." He gripped the sides of the podium, leaning forward slightly. "In the military, we learned that diversity of experience makes a team stronger. Different perspectives save lives. The same is true in business. When we judge people solely by traditional metrics, we miss out on incredible talent and wisdom." The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by occasional sniffles from the moved audience. "I stand here today not as a former SEAL trying to prove himself, but as a man who understands that every experience, every struggle, every victory, every setback has value." John's voice carried to the farthest corners of the room. "I'm grateful to Miss Hale and this company for seeing that value, for giving me the chance to show that leadership isn't about where you came from, but about where you're willing to go and who you're willing to help along the way." He straightened up, his voice firm with conviction. "To everyone here who has ever felt out of place, who has ever been told they don't belong, who has ever doubted their own worth, remember this: your experiences matter. Your perspective matters. You matter." John's eyes swept the room one final time. "Thank you for teaching me that second chances aren't just about starting over. They're about growing stronger. And thank you for showing me that sometimes the greatest act of service is simply believing in yourself and others." As John stepped back from the podium, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, many wiping tears from their eyes. Through the standing ovation, Emily remained seated for a moment, her heart swelling with pride. She looked up at her father, her hero, and whispered, "That's my dad." The applause gradually died down as people began filing out of the auditorium. John stood at the podium, gathering his notes with trembling hands, still processing the overwhelming response to his speech. The emotions of the day had left him drained but somehow lighter, as if a weight he'd carried since leaving the service had finally begun to lift. As the last few employees trickled out, their voices echoing in the hallway beyond, Emily caught his eye from the front row and gave him a knowing smile. She gestured that she'd wait outside, understanding that some moments needed space. Victoria Hale remained in her seat, watching as the room emptied. Her usual commanding presence had softened, and she looked almost small in the vast auditorium. When the door finally clicked shut behind the last person, she stood and walked slowly toward the stage. John noticed her hands fidgeting with her pearl necklace, a nervous gesture he'd never seen from the normally composed CEO. He stepped down from the podium to meet her at eye level. "That was quite a speech," Victoria said quietly, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "Thank you, ma'am. Please." She held up her hand. "Just Victoria." She took a deep breath, and John could see her, struggling to find the right words. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me get it all out." John nodded, standing at ease, a habit from his military days that now brought comfort rather than tension. "When you first sat in my office," Victoria began, her voice wavering slightly, "I saw what I wanted to see, a man who didn't fit my narrow view of success. I looked at your service like it was somehow less valuable than an MBA." She paused, swallowing hard. "I was wrong. So terribly wrong." She walked to one of the front row seats and sank into it, patting the spot next to her. John sat down, giving her the space to continue. "You know, I buried those memories of the kidnapping so deep," she continued, staring straight ahead. "The fear, the helplessness. I couldn't bear to feel that vulnerable. Instead, I built walls. I became the person who could never be hurt again." She turned to face him. "And then you walked into my office, and those walls started crumbling." John listened quietly, recognizing the cost of such honesty from someone used to being in control. "I'm not speaking as your CEO right now," Victoria said, her eyes glistening. "I'm speaking as the woman who once sat in a dark room, certain she would die, until a team of brave men risked everything to save her. I'm speaking as the same woman who years later mocked one of those men because she was too proud, too scared to remember. She wiped at her eyes with manicured fingers, leaving slight smudges of mascara that made her look more human than John had ever seen her. "I don't just owe you an apology for how I treated you in that interview," she continued. "I owe you an apology for every day since then that I didn't acknowledge the debt I could never repay. For every moment I let others diminish your worth in this company. For every time my pride kept me from standing up sooner." John shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the intensity of her words. "Ma'am, Victoria, you don't owe me anything." "But I do," she insisted. "I owe you my life. And more than that, I owe you the dignity of acknowledging who you are, who you've always been, a leader, a protector, a man of honor." She took another shaky breath. "Can you ever forgive me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with years of unspoken gratitude and regret. John thought about his daughter waiting outside, about the lessons in forgiveness he'd tried to teach her since losing her mother. He thought about his own struggles with pride and judgment. "You know," he said slowly, "in the SEALs, we learned that carrying extra weight only slows you down. Grudges, regret, bitterness, they're all just dead weight." He stood up and offered his hand to Victoria. "Forgiveness was given long ago. The question is, can you forgive yourself?" Victoria stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, then took it firmly. As she rose, her shoulders straightened, but her eyes remained soft. "Thank you, John, for everything, then and now." They shook hands warmly, and John could feel the tension between them dissolving. Victoria's smile reached her eyes for perhaps the first time since he'd known her. "Well," she said, smoothing her skirt, "I should let you get back to your daughter. She's quite remarkable, you know. You've done an amazing job with her." "She's the one who's done an amazing job with me," John replied. They walked toward the auditorium doors, both moving with lighter steps. The weight of the past had lifted, replaced by the quiet understanding of two people who had finally seen each other clearly. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hale Enterprises' conference room. John Carter stood before a group of 20 veterans, their faces a mix of hope and uncertainty, expressions he knew all too well. "Welcome to your first day," John said, his voice warm and steady. "I know exactly what you're thinking right now. The suits feel strange. The chairs are too comfortable. And you're wondering if you really belong here." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. One young woman, fresh from the army, nodded vigorously. "3 months ago, I sat where you are now," John continued, moving around the table. "But what I've learned is that the skills you gained in service, leadership, crisis management, teamwork, they're invaluable here. You just need to learn how to translate them." He picked up a stack of folders and began distributing them. "These are your department assignments. We've matched each of you with mentors who understand both worlds, corporate and military. I'll be working with each of you personally." Victoria Hale stood quietly in the doorway, watching. Her usual sharp business attire seemed softer somehow, and she smiled as she observed John in his element. When he noticed her, she gave an approving nod. "Mr. Carter," one of the veterans spoke up, a former Marine with prosthetic leg, I heard about what happened when you first started here. How do you deal with people who might not want us here? John paused, considering the question carefully. By showing up every day, by doing the work, by remembering that your worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion. And, he smiled, by knowing you're not alone anymore. Throughout the morning, John led orientation sessions, introducing the veterans to their departments. In IT, a former Air Force technician lit up when she saw the advanced security systems. In logistics, a Navy veteran immediately spotted inefficiencies in the supply chain and offered solutions. During lunch break, John sat in his office, no longer the small cubicle he'd started in, but a modest corner space with photos of Emily and his SEAL team on the walls. He was reviewing mentor assignments when Victoria knocked on his door. "The board just approved the additional funding for the veteran program," she said, entering. "We can expand to 50 positions by next quarter." John looked up, genuine gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Victoria. This means everything to them." She sat down, her usual CEO persona giving way to something more personal. "No, thank you, John. You've changed this company. Changed me." She gestured to the window where the new hires were gathering. "Look at them. They remind me of you that first day, except they have something you didn't." "What's that?" "Someone who understands them. Someone who's walked their path." She stood to leave, then turned back. "Oh, and Emily called. She's waiting in the lobby to have lunch with you." John checked his watch and smiled. Their daily lunch meetings had become sacred time, a tradition born from their struggles and strengthened by their triumph. In the lobby, Emily sat reading a book, her backpack beside her. When she saw John, her face lit up. At 16, she carried herself with new confidence, proud of who she was and where she came from. "Dad!" She hugged him tight. "How are the new veterans doing?" "Good, really good." They walked toward their favorite deli across the street. "Remember Marcus, the Marine I told you about? He already has 3 ideas for improving the warehouse system." Emily squeezed his hand. "Just like you, always finding ways to make things better." They passed the security desk where John's first challenges had begun. Now, the guards saluted him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They passed the break room where he'd once overheard mockery, now filled with animated discussions between veterans and civilian employees. "You know what Sarah from my class said today?" Emily asked as they waited for the elevator. "She said her mom applied for the veteran program. She served in the Army, but she's been struggling to find work," Sarah said. "She said you gave her mom hope." John felt his throat tighten. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped in. Through the glass walls, they could see the city sprawling before them, bathed in the warm afternoon light. "Dad?" Emily's voice was soft. "Remember when you used to say you didn't know where we belonged anymore? After Mom died, and you left the service?" John nodded, memories of their uncertain days washing over him. "Look around," she said, gesturing to the building that had become so much more than just a workplace. "Look at all the lives you're changing. Look at how far we've come." They reached the lobby, and John signed out for the day. As they walked through the revolving doors, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Emily's hand found his, just as it had during their darkest days. "We're finally home, Dad," she said softly. John smiled, feeling the truth of her words deep in his soul. The peace he'd been searching for had found him not in letting go of his past, but in using it to build a better future. In his daughter's eyes, he saw all the hope and purpose he'd ever need. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of John Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.